We are at the end of the road from the perspective of the workshop, and panelists can just stay here because I just had a few closing thoughts. As we wind down the workshop, I had a couple of last things. In thinking about what we accomplished today, there were some points that were made that I just wanted to share with you again because I thought they were particularly notable. Just going back to the beginning of the workshop, I think when Dan was talking about how ONF has been progressing, one of the things that struck me that he said that I really thought about during lunch today was that if we look at where the growth is actually unfolded in the Open Networking Foundation, it's here. A lot of it is in the APAC region. China has been a pretty significant part of that growth, but it's not just China. It's in Korea, Taiwan, some of the other countries. Japan has always been a place where it's unfolded. Southeast Asia is starting to also come online. So it's actually in APAC that's where a lot of the ONF progress has been made. I then gave a presentation on the state of affairs with regard to the ONF in 2015. And the one point I just wanted to reiterate, just because I think it's particularly important, is this whole discussion on openness and what does openness really mean. And I wanted to just take this opportunity to share one more time. Openness continues to be about more than multi-vendor interoperability. There is this notion that if we can actually create a vendor-neutral platform, and that platform doesn't necessarily have to be open source, but open source is certainly a part of it, then we'll be able to incentivize the right type of participation to actually achieve the overall objectives of the open architecture. So it's really about multi-vendor interoperability and about being vendor neutral. And I think that gets lost in the shuffle in the quest to try to find a multi-vendor alternative. The other point I was going to make is that about intent. I think we made this later in this particular panel. Is that the whole intent-based structure of the northbound is being driven by this community because of the nature of the end users who stand the most to gain. And I think that's true in all of SDN, but certainly in the northbound API. And we heard about it from some of the operators as well. In our first panel, there were a number of points made. I think that Dan had made an eloquent case about why we need an open programmable southbound interface. It's not just about the northbound, but the southbound as well. Guang had gave us some data points about not only what's happening in China, but the fact that SDN has really evolved and matured over the last year in a number of different deployments and a number of different operators. Shahar pointed out he made a point that I thought was particularly interesting, and it's about adoption. And it's not a technical issue, but it's really more about the organizational issues. And then Andy talked about how, and this was sort of an interesting perspective, that SDN is causing people who work in cost centers to go and generate new revenues, which is really what it's about. And I think that, in essence, is what the Open SDN movement is about. It's about creating new opportunities. It's not just about streamlining cost and operations. Those are secondary objectives. But if we can create new opportunities for everyone in the overall value chain, I think that's really the most important aspect of what Open SDN offers. And then Shakar again, I mean, in his presentation, well, I don't think we're going to forget OpenPlow for a long time. And I thank Bill for enlightening us that there actually is an open source tractor. So I guess we'll have to go and check that out for next year and see what that's all about. But also what Shakar also pointed out, and again, he was looking at the interdomain problem, which is a problem we solve today. It's not necessarily an SDN problem. I mean, there's an implication, but it's certainly something we solve today. But one of the keys that I think, Shakar, that you pointed out was that we need more than just an operational agreement. That commercial agreement maybe more important, maybe more difficult, more expensive to forge in the overall scheme of things than just the operational agreement of whether we can actually hook things together. It always comes down to the people side at the end of the day when we talk about that. And then Mike was talking about how there are a number of different open source pieces, and the way Mike gave his presentation, what I was sort of paying attention to is that it's almost a natural course now that open source, of course open source is a part of the overall architecture. What else would we do? At least for some of the platform components. And then in this session, there were a number of things that we raised, but I think the key is that we don't want, again, contrary to where we were in the past, we're not all rushing out and excited about generating more standards. That's not what we need. We need the least amount of standards that we can get by with, and we need the right standards that focus on the right motivations. And I think that to create those standards, and this is where Phil and Bill really, I think their presence on this panel is so important. We cannot develop the kind of complex technologies anymore without an iterative process with the implementation as integral to that process. I don't think standards are ever going to be the same in communications ever again because of the path that we're on now. I think it's changed forever. And I think that when we look at what is happening with not just SDN, but NFV as well, we're going to come back to this model time and time again. That's why the open platform for NFV exists. That's why the ONF is actually devoting more resources into open source. That's why the communities are going to continue to grow, is because we need the open source validation of the requirements so that we can even create the standard in the first place. So with that, we've come to the end of our day, and I want to thank everybody for participating. I want to thank all of the speakers, the presenters, the panelists. I want to thank everybody who made the long and short journeys to be here today and be here this week for the conference. Again, I want to thank the Layer 123 organization for providing such a strong basis for a partnership that's lasted through, Dan, how many? 7 events now I think we've done? We've done 7 events and co-hosted 7 workshops together. And finally, before we break, I just want to remind you to come back at 5:15. We'd love to have you in the foyer for our ONF meetup and reception. There's a 15-minute break now, and then there'll be vendor workshops that are going to be held for Huawei and Alcatel-Lucent. And you better check with them because they're only open. There's some limited requirements for attending these events. So I want to wish everybody a productive 2015 APAC Congress and a good evening as well. So thank you very much.